Welcome to the Business as Mission podcast, dedicated to those who long to see God glorified in business and the nations reached for Christ. Your host is Mike Bayer, longtime BAM leader and founder of Third Path Initiative, an online education resource for starting and growing BAM businesses around the world.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Business as Mission podcast. I've got a returning guest and a great friend of mine, a close brother of the work of the gospel, Larry Sharp. And he hates it when I say Dr. Larry Sharp, but he is. He's a doctor of education and a very, very smart guy. Larry has been in missions for a long time. He has taught missions. He has founded a work called IBEC Ventures. He has coached business as mission practitioners. He's teaching at various universities around the country and in Canada, and had his own stretch overseas in South America for many, many years. So from all that experience, it's just always good to see Larry and know that he's going to share something with us worth hearing. Particularly for today, we're going to be talking about his newest book, Mission Disrupted, which is a great title. And so you will explain that a little bit as we get into it. But first of all, welcome, Larry. Great to have you back and great to see you.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to talk to you again and wonderful to talk about God at work in the world.
Absolutely. And so let's go right to the book. There's so many things we can get caught up on. Larry and I talk regularly because we're involved in a work together called Venture, which is courses, coaches, and capital for BAMers. But this is about his latest book, Mission Disrupted. And I guess, Larry, let's just start with why the book? What got you moving to write another one, and why this one?
Well, yeah, thanks for the question, Mike. I like to look at my life, and I encourage others that I work with sometimes to look at the fact that we all should be learning. The world is changing. God's word remains fixed, and we know that he's at work in the world. And so let's keep learning how that works. And so after the book I wrote called The Greatest Missionary Generation, which was a wonderful endeavor for me as I interviewed all these missionaries and came up with this term, the greatest missionary generation was after the Second World War and basically the last half of the 20th century, where God worked amazingly with missionaries that went out all over the world. The world was wide open, and God did amazing things during those years. But as I began to reflect on that, and I saw all these things that God did in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and through there, I thought, wow, the world is so different today. And how is God working in now? And what does that look like? And so that pushed me back to looking at the scriptures more profoundly than I had before, and also trying to understand the world in ways that maybe I hadn't thought about before. So as I did those two things, I realized, wow, there's almost no comparison to the pathway that people who were caring about what God was doing in the world progressed throughout their lives in the last half of the 20th century in comparison to today. And so that propelled me into this study of this and talking to people, looking at mission businesses that were successful and why they were successful, and how God was working there. So that's kind of how I got going on that.
It's as you're talking about that, Larry, I'm thinking about, the history of the church seems to divide itself into seasons.
Yeah.
And he has a different way, not a different mission, not a different purpose,
right?
Different method of doing his work in the world. And, the early church and global missions in those days, very different. And a lot of us harken back to the days of Hudson Taylor and Judson and, the sort of golden age of missions. And then I think your point about the second half of the 20th century is spot on, that God really used the sort of, we call it today, the traditional missions model to thrust people into all parts of the earth. But you said something that I think is hard for people to hear and hard to swallow, and that is what he did from sort of 1945 to 2000-ish is not working today in anywhere near the way it used to. And so you've argued for a new model, a modern model, if you will. But I think it's hard for people to hear that. Before we actually get into it, why do you think that is? First of all, do you agree? And secondly, why do you think it's so hard for people to entertain that there's a different methodology, not a different mission, but a different methodology today?
It's a little hard to grasp. I mean, you could list several reasons. Let's just take the reason that, not a theological reason, which I think is probably the most profound reason, but let's just take a practical reason. 65% of the world's population, over 4 billion, are in countries where it is impossible to get a missionary visa or a religious worker's visa. And that's how you become a missionary. And so that is a statistic which you really have a hard time getting your mind around. And so people can't really respond to that without some prayer and reflection and understanding and conversation to understand. And so what that is, the church has basically retrenched and said, okay, well, we'll send them to Mexico or to Australia and different places around the world where they can freely go, like they could 70 years ago. I can remember as a little kid, my parents coming to faith, and we began to pray for missionaries in all these countries that are closed today, to missionaries. But they're not closed to a Christian taking a skill or their profession there and living like Jesus. And so that's one thing that makes it difficult. Another one is this whole, we have professionalized or we have outsourced the gospel transmission to a certain class of people. And those are the missionaries, the profession. And we've done that for so long that nobody can think in another modality. And so, but the Bible teaches, I think, that everybody is to live missionally. The book Scatter, forget Scott's last name right now, but he makes it very clear that God doesn't want us to give up who we are, as we're wired for something like a medical work or engineering or architect or business management, whatever it might be. God wants to use all of that. So what does that mean for a lot of those people? It means getting involved in these countries. And so that's very hard for people to understand. I believe that we need to be patient and keep teaching this, that I took my grandson to Cambodia with me and visited several freedom businesses. And he's he's graduating from Baylor with a degree in management. And he said to me, this is like 5 years ago, he said, Grandpa, this is what I want to do with my degree, my management skill. I want to be involved in a business that's making a difference, not only for spiritually, but for people's lives who are just really entrenched in poverty. And he called me the other day. He said, Grandpa, I graduated in 2 months. He said, I'm taking a job with Oracle, and I'm going to learn stuff, but I'm still on track to serve God in a way with my business abilities. His dad's a business guy, and overseas serve the gospel. Now, if the whole world began to think that way, it would make amazing differences for the gospel. So, and the other thing is that, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z are not going to support traditional missions. They can't get their minds around it. And rather than be fearful of that, I say that's okay, and let's think differently. We'll talk more about that.
Exactly. Let's embrace what's happening and turn it for the kingdom, not necessarily fight it. So that leads me, one of the plays on words that you make two of them in the book. You talk about the difference between, and you just kind of went there, professional missionaries and then missional professionals, which is a great way of saying, I think, what you just said. But talk a little bit more about that, Larry. I think that's a useful term to unpack.
Yeah. I was a professional missionary, but by that I went into the Brazilian consulate in New York in 1972. I had no appointment. I walked in and I said, I'd like to get a visa for Brazil. And they said, what are you going to do there? I said, I'm part of a mission agency. They said, how long do you want to stay? I said, as long as I can. I walked out that very same day from the Brazilian consulate in New York with a visa, and I stayed in Brazil for 21 years. Now, that is never going to happen anywhere in the world in the future. Now, we have to respond to that. We just can't say, well, I don't know, maybe I'll just keep putting along the way. We've got to deal with those kinds of issues. And anyway, so we went to Brazil and as a professional missionary, and people supported us. Churches supported us. And we tried to communicate faithfully and live and be that So those churches, those individuals looked at it in terms of outsourcing, bringing up the gospel to the Amazon of Brazil, to people like me who are doing our part over there. That's a professional missionary. And that's all good. And we still need those. I'm not knocking that. But I'm saying that something has to happen differently if you want to get the gospel to Tajikistan or to any one of these countries that are without. There's no way to get in as a traditional missionary, and so then a missional professional is a person with a skill. Let's just take an engineer that I know in Kazakhstan, and we worked with him for a long time, and his business is growing. He's manufacturing lifts for businesses that need to raise up product to high places. It's a manufacturing company, and he's doing that for the glory of God. And he's there with a business visa, and he has a real business, and he's following what we call in BAM the quadruple bottom line. He's making money, so he's profitable. He creates value, creates wealth. Deuteronomy says he's there creating jobs. He's there having opportunities to share his faith, and essentially seeing people come to Christ, and he's aware of the environment and creation and so on. And so that's the difference between professional missionary and missional professional.
So I think it's significant that you emphasize that we're not looking for professional missionaries to go away. They're not the enemy. I think sometimes there's a tension between the professional missionary, as you describe it, and a practitioner of business's mission, or medicine's mission, or government's mission, just walking with God in whatever he's called you to in life. And you and I both experienced that. But I think it's an important distinction, and it's one that we need to constantly reach out to those that don't agree with us, or maybe are troubled by this disruption, and have more conversation, so people are seeing things, not necessarily even agreeing on everything, but agreeing that God is doing new things. Let's at least be open to that. So Larry, you mentioned a couple of times, you mentioned this idea of almost like a nexus, a coming together of a business theory called disruptive innovation, which we're all living with, right? I mean, the hot topic you and I were talking about before the podcast began is artificial intelligence. Talk about something that's going to be disruptive. That's a huge issue in business. So is the whole electrification of everything, and I mean, we can go all the way back to the internet and so many things. So there's this business reality of disruptive innovation, but you've managed to now take that concept and marry it to and join it to the concept, the theological foundation of Missio Dei. Talk about that a little bit and how that works in your thinking.
Yeah, I wanted to set this in the set of modern day realities that are biblical, that's theology, and also business theory, which has brought an understanding as to how business has developed over the years. So Missio Dei is different. The mission of God is different than our missions. Sometimes, I look at a church and they say, well, we do mission. Well, what does that mean? Well, we went and built some cabins for a camp down in Peru. Okay, great. Nothing wrong with that. But are they really understanding the mission of God, which is it's not our mission. It's not our church's mission. It's the mission of God. And what does that mean for the whole person? And what does that mean for their general livelihood and so on? So I could talk more about that, but focusing on the business theory, along with the theology of Missio Dei, the business theory, I took Clayton Christensen's term, disruptive innovation, and what he developed at Harvard. And as he points out, like you just said, Mike, just about everything today has emerged as a disruption of something that existed before. And as that thing, I remember when I bought my first Sony transition radio, and my dad said, "What do you need this for? We have a nice big RCA one in the living room, and we can listen to the hockey games." And I remember listening to Charlie Fuller on this big old RCA thing. And why do you need this? Well, guess what? I could sneak away with this little transistor radio and listen to Elvis. And my dad wouldn't let me listen to Elvis over here. And I could go to the beach with this thing, and so I was a customer at the bottom of the natural curve, and so the main stream of clients and customers was in the 2/3 majority at the middle of the curve. The people that were buying the thing were at the bottom of the curve, and so that Sony marketed it to us young people. They didn't market to the people with money, like my parents' generation, and so everything is that way. Computers. When I was in college, big old computer down the end of the hall, no mysterious thing with these cards we hauled around, and everybody said, "Well, nobody needs a computer. We just need one for the whole university." Well, guess what? Everybody's got one in their pocket today.
Yeah, exactly.
And so all this, every industry, and AI is the latest one, as you mentioned. And so I take that concept let's look at the church and say, okay, how is this going to change? How are people going to understand? And it's going to be people who are marginalized from the Great Commission in their church. And I define those as young people and business people, because I've had so many business people. I've had sports athletes. I've had them say, I love Jesus. I believe in the Great Commission. I give to my church. I've gone on mission trips, but still I'm a little bit marginalized because I'm not a pastor or I'm not a missionary, and I'm down on the spiritual pyramid. There is no spiritual pyramid. We all are the same from Jesus' perspective, and the people that are going to get it and change, just like in industry, people are those at the bottom of the natural curve, the early adopters. The people are getting this. And I love my pastor. I love every pastoral person I've ever met. And I went to school with so many people that went through seminary and are pastors today. I love those guys, but they're not getting this. And they're serving this generation. But my book, I'm trying to get people to be ready to serve the next generation.
Yeah,
which is going to serve with their whole heart and their whole body. So the gospel goes to the nations with all of us involved, not just a small part of us who we outsource the gospel to. And so that's why I applied mission disruptive innovation.
We'll be right back after a short break. The Business as Mission podcast is in partnership with TriVenture, the BAM Launchpad. TriVenture offers the 3 ingredients every entrepreneur needs to launch and scale a BAM business: courses, coaching, and capital. For more information, visit triventure.com.
I come back to the difference between the word mission with no S on the end of it and missions, and I kind of break them out as, the mission, the mission of God, the purpose of God, the outcome God is working toward never changes. That is absolutely unchangeable. And no amount of geopolitical turmoil or technology is going to change that purpose of God to bring redemption to his creation. The missions, I think of as a tactic, right? It's simply the current way of aligning with the mission singular. And that's what I hear you describing. And I look at that and I think, okay, so the mission remains forever the same. The methodology, as we said earlier, it does change with the times. And then, not just kind of to follow with what you just said, I think back when I was a kid, I was born in 1955. So for some people, I'm just a baby, but for others, I'm an old man. And so I look at this and I think, okay, in my day in America and in England and in certain other countries, you went to church on Sunday, right? The people, by and large, went to a local congregation and they sang songs and they heard sermons and that was the center of the Great Commission. So it made sense that would be the center of the world's experience of the Great Commission, right? Sending from that church professionals to go do the same thing overseas. With it changing now, I mean, I don't know what the latest statistic is, but the church attendance just in the U.S. has dropped like a rocket. I mean, it's unbelievable how low it is, and we all bemoan that. But doesn't it follow to say, okay, if the circumstances have changed, the mission of reaching those people hasn't changed. So if they're not going to come to church, they're not going to come to a building on the corner of First and Main Street, what are we going to do? And that's what leads to disruptive thinking. Your example of the transistor radio is perfect. And I always, I keep reminding myself that the iPhone, which I love my iPhone. It's only been around for 16 years.
Yeah,
I can't, but the new generation, these young people coming along, they've never known a time where they didn't have an iPhone or an Android. They've never known what it is to get up and change a channel on a television. I mean, all these things. So we're looking at it as older guys, and we need to say, Lord, what are you saying to the church? And that's why I love your book. I think it's just it's a great way of saying these are some of the things that God is speaking to the church. Let me take a different angle here for a second, because there's an important, I think this is a unifying factor, the way you go there. This whole idea of the great commandment that Jesus, that he gave us, but he reiterated. And so, and it fits in here, but tell us how you see that and how this modern disruption is infused with that commandment.
Yeah, when I'm talking to college students, I say this. I said, I'm going to make a statement, and I'd like you to respond to it. The Great Commandment is equal in importance with the Great Commission, and both are priority. There is no one different than the other, no priority one over the other. And then I stop there and let them reflect on that. And then I say, if you go away from this and tell your professor or your pastor or some friend that this guy came to class and he denied the Great Commission as being the most important thing, then I'll deny it. So it's kind of a joke I play on them. But the point is that I really think I've come to the position that the Great Commandment is as important as the Great Commission. The Great Commission was given at the end of Jesus' ministry, and to go and make disciples, not plant churches. So that's another part of the book that people get a little upset about. But is to make disciples. But that is based on us being in a community or a place where we can show the love of God. And what does love look like? I use this story when I was in Bosnia after the war, and there was 65% unemployment in southern Bosnia. And it was on the government website. So it wasn't like somebody made that up. That was true. And we observed that, and we saw that, and we stood there over the Drina River and talked about it with business guys and said, what would Jesus do if he walked up here on this bridge? And we saw him and we said, great, we get to ask Jesus. Jesus, we believe in the whole BAM movement, and certainly here in this conversation, we believe that Jesus would create jobs for these people.
Right.
I just got something on my computer or my phone this morning from a guy who's very involved in the Philippines, and they still are asking for money to support the pastors. Hey, the world has changed. We have to be able to help those pastors support themselves. We have to help the whole Christian community to live like Jesus where they're at. And so the Great Commandment does that for me, and I think for all of us, that we go into these countries, people begin to see us as bringing the love of Jesus because we're bringing jobs, we're bringing training, we're bringing love to people who are hurting. And as we live and do that, just like Jesus, everywhere he went, he said, what do you need? And it was a rhetorical question because it was obviously they were blind or they were hungry or they were late. And we go and do the same thing. What do you need? I need jobs. Jim puts it in his book, The Coming Jobs War, pretty clear on that. The whole world needs that. And that's the economic model as well. And as we do that, we can live out the Great Commission of making disciples.
Okay.
And so for me, that's why the Great Commandment is so important here. And unfortunately, my generation grew up when there was a big battle over this, and we in the 1930s and 20s and 30s, we evangelicals turned away from the so-called social gospel, and we just preached Jesus. So I grew up in the 50s and 60s, well, you get the 4 spiritual laws, which were great. You tell them about that and get off the train, and nobody knows what happens next.
Yeah.
And God used some of that, but really I need to be part of that person's life. And you can't be better involved in people's lives than being involved in the business world with them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and I think a lot of the leadership in the churches still holds to that old, liberals do social justice, evangelicals do evangelism. It's like, no, we do the whole thing. We're supposed to do the whole thing. And so
That's
I think I've been accused, you've been accused of teaching a social gospel. It's like, not at all.
Right.
Exactly. We teach the death, burial, resurrection of Christ for the redemption of sins. But to do that in a vacuum with no food, no medicine, no job, there is a whole list. There's as you've heard the phrase, we've all heard it, the whole gospel for the whole man. To me,
right.
The thing. So, all right. So we're talking about the disruption now. Larry, put your crystal ball on the table and tell us some of the things that you think might be happening in the future.
Well, I'd like the future to maybe not so much, and I get lots of trouble with this, not so much church-focused, but individual-focused. Of course, the church, as a body of believers, it looks different in different countries of the world, and we have to accept that. But and we want to accept that. My dream is that the believers who have a God-given wiring for something professional that they can sell to the world, to the marketplace, and they can have a job. Just a little parentheses here, I'm teaching 50-plus pastors in northern India that are dirt poor and believe that they should receive a salary as a pastor, and that salary comes from the United States. Bad model, needs to be changed. And do you know what they asked me to teach? They asked me to teach, and I'm in the second one next Monday, on the theology of work. What they are learning is it's okay to work. It's okay to be involved in the marketplace and be a bivocational pastor. And they don't get that. And you know that from working in the former Soviet Union countries, Mike. They have a very difficult time with that. And so I dream of God's people getting the vision that they themselves have to live out. Now, 90+% of the people in, say, America will go and live overseas, but everybody who's there's 7 million Americans that work overseas. It's just 5% of them were Christians, and they lived out their gospel in the marketplace. That'll make a tremendous difference. And I know a guy who's a chemical engineer working with a bunch of Saudis in Riyadh. He waits for the opportunity. And when they ask what's different about America, well, what do you do on the weekends in America? Hey, it's an easy answer. I go to church because I follow God. Oh, you do? But can I tell? What's that mean? Those kinds of things take place, and every believer, everywhere, should be ready for that kind of action. So that's what I dream for the future, and that's going to come from the bottom up. It's going to come from the early adopters. And I'll give you an example real quick here. 12 years ago, after giving a seminar in my home church, the pastor attended, a bunch of people, a lot of people attended, and he called me in Sunday night after this all-day Saturday thing and the Sunday morning message I gave, and he said, let's talk Monday morning. Monday morning, I walked into his office, and he didn't say 2 sentences before he said, I don't believe that what you're teaching is biblical. And I said, well, to tell me more what you're thinking. He said, the gospel is transmitted by specially called people who have the training and ability to share. And I thought, man, they supported us all these years. I'm at risk here. And I went home to my wife, and I wasn't home at 2 hours. And I had a phone call, said, I'm a lawyer. I just graduated from Notre Dame. How can I help? Another guy said, I have a business down the beach road, and that we have about 35 employees, and I'd like to come and talk to the whole one. So I said, are they Christian? He said, no, nobody's a Christian. I said, but I want you to teach this to them. And so on. And I was discouraged to a point there, and I have been through the years. But just last year, the chairman of the missions committee, when one of their people wanted to start a business in Southeast Asia, they said, you need to come and talk to Larry Sharp. He's with IBEC, and he'll help with you. And that guy's in Southeast Asia today. There was a business startup, and they got the idea that they need to live out the gospel in the marketplace. And that's from our home church, who 12 years ago said, this is all phony. Or he didn't say it that way. He said, this is a passing fad. Those were his words. And so I dream of that's, there's been change in our home church. There's others doing the same thing. They're looking how they can use their profession for kingdom purposes. And so that's what I dream about, and thank God for the churches and individuals who are getting that and understanding and coming through TriVenture, taking your courses, Mike, and it's few. I wish it was hundreds of, but they're coming, and I dream of the day when it will really be everyone that sees the gospel that way.
One of my favorite stories of my professor, Howard Hendricks from Dallas Seminary, very privileged to study under him and get to know him. But he said one time something that I've never forgotten, and this is decades ago. He said, missions and ministry are a lot like football. There are 22 men on the field in desperate need of rest, and there are 80,000 people in the stands in desperate need of exercise. And I didn't know how to apply. I mean, I got it, kind of the old 80-20 rule. But I as the more I thought about it, in the context of the BAM movement, is that's what we see in missions today. And BAM as this whole disruptive thing that you're talking about is trying to get the 80,000 people out of the stands and into the game. And what I'm finding, like you're finding, is business people and young people are saying, I've always wanted to be in the game. I'm glad that you said I can do that. There's actually a role for me in this, and I don't have to go to a Bible college, and I don't have to go get a seminary degree or whatever. There's a place for me in what God is doing in the world, and I find it to be incredibly affirming and encouraging and inviting people to throw themselves, with abandon into the will of God for their lives. And it's just it's been a joy. All right, let's come in for a landing. Simple question. Where can people get the book? Missions Disrupted, Larry Sharp. Where can they find it so that they can read it? It's a great read. Larry's a good writer with a fantastic topic. And so where can they find it, Larry? How can they get it?
The cheapest place is christianbook.com. That's the cheapest. That's cheaper than Amazon. But and so I recommend that way to get it as an individual. If you have a class like a ladies group or a men's group or something, and you want to order 20 or more, we can send it at cost. And so that will save about $5 a book. And I would send it from here in your bulk of 20 or more. So that's a couple of ways you can get it.
And do they just email you directly at your IBEC email?
Yeah, sure. Larry.Sharp at IBEC Ventures, IBEC Ventures.com.
Yeah, and just for those of you who would make the mistake I did, there's no E on Sharp. For many months, I kept getting rejected emails. I'm saying to Larry, what's up? And he finally got something. He said, well, that's not how you spell my name. So it's SHARP, not with an E on it. So, correct. All right. So if you want to get an individual, christianbook.com or Amazon, if that's easier for you, and or in bulk from Larry.Sharp at IBECVentures.com. Great opportunity. I'm just going to invite the listeners, and I'll put all that in the show notes. I invite the listeners to get a copy, share a copy, get people thinking, talking, praying, seeking, and really ultimately say, Lord, what would you have me to do? That's really what it comes down to. And he loves to blow up our categories. He loves to blow up our preconceived notions of how things should happen. So, Larry, God bless you, brother. Great to have you on, as always. Great to see you. And look forward to more conversations in the future.
Thank you, Mike. And just one final comment. All of this is based in Scripture. And as we go back and want to see what it was like in the Old Testament, we'll see what it was like after Acts chapter 8. I think it will really blow our minds as to how we bring the gospel to the world. So anyways, thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Mike.
Always good to see you, Larry.
Blessings.
Thanks for listening to the Business as Mission podcast. We invite you to become part of the story by supporting the BAM podcast at patreon.com/BAM Stories. There's a link in the notes with this episode. For more information, go to thirdpathinitiative.com or tryventure.com. Please share this podcast and give us a review wherever you listen.